Good evening, Pete. How are you tonight?
I'm great. Good to see you again, Chuck.
Absolutely. Well, I am, as I think you appreciate, really excited about this likely multiple episodes because I am excited to share the story that you have to tell with our listeners and our viewers. So, first of all, thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to tell the story again.
All right. So I'd like to start just with some background. So because while many of us, especially those in congenital hand surgery, know your story and are grateful, and you've been a mentor to me, but I'd love to just tell your story very briefly before we jump into the meat of the matter. Where did you do your residency training?
I was a resident at Parkland with Dr. Charles Gregory, one of the real great orthopedic educators. And was very lucky to be able to get that residency. I'm not certain that I could even qualify for a residency today, but it was a great experience for me. And then when I finished my residency, or towards the end of it, I got interested in hand surgery from a course that I went to out in California that the Hand Society put on. And I had a chance to see some of the people I'd heard about. And I realized that hand surgeons were really neat guys, and they were approachable, and they had fun doing what they did. And some of these names like Joe Boyce and Julio Telesnik was just a pup then, but he was the one running the course. And there were some other terrific guys. Al Swanson was out there, and wonderful guy that I'm trying to remember his name. He was from Utah, and he invented Snyder. His name was Snyder. He was a plastic surgeon in Utah. Really interesting, kind of crazy guy who invented the cling bandage, believe it or not, and never got any credit for it. J&J stole it, but he also invented the Snyder Hemovac, and he did get some credit for that. It's the thing that we all suck blood out of total hip replacements. And he was a fascinating guy, and one of his side gigs was he got interested in snake bite. And at that time, this was in the 70s, 40 years or more ago, there wasn't an available human antivenom. And he had a bunch of Mormon boys out there in Utah that liked to play with snakes, and they'd been bitten a lot, and they had tremendous titers against the venom. And he would harvest their gamma globulin, and surreptitiously he could get this across the state line to treat people that had snake bite but were allergic to horse serum, which is not that rare. So it was a fascinating thing. And I came home from that meeting and I said, Susie, that business about going to a small town and being a general orthopedist, you can forget that. I'm going to be a hand surgeon. So I told Dr. Gregory, and he was very excited about that. Dr. Gregory was not interested in hand surgery. When we would present a case, if it was a hand case, it was just next case to him. But it wasn't that he didn't think it was important. He just didn't know much about it, and he wasn't interested in talking about it. And he was very encouraging. And I'd been in the Army for a couple of years during Vietnam. I got drafted out of my internship. Spent a couple of years doing sick call. I was a Army flight surgeon, but basically it was coughs, colds, and sore holes. I didn't really do anything very spectacular from the standpoint of medical care. But at that time, there were a few programs in the country that the chairman, if the person had been in the Army before and had gotten a lot of experience, he could give the person some credit time-wise. So I was able to start my hand fellowship 6 months before my residency would have been finished. And that dovetailed in nicely with Dr. Littler's program, because at that time, he took 2 fellows a year. usually it was one orthopedist and then one plastic surgeon. And one of the fellows started in July and one started in January. Both of them served a year, but that meant that there was always a senior fellow. So I got to start in January, and my senior fellow was a guy named Rod Hentz from California. And Rod was the first plastic surgeon I ever met that knew anything about hand surgery. And then, of course, Dr. Littler changed my whole viewpoint on that, but he was a pretty unusual plastic surgeon. At any rate, so I got the program in hand surgery up there, and I came back to Dallas in 1976.
Can I interrupt and ask a quick question? What if you had to summarize the most important 1 or 2 lessons you learned from Dr. Littler, what would they be?
Oh gosh.
Did he teach you how to draw?
Well, it was a little bit intimidating trying to draw anything with him in the room. He had been an artist since he was a child. His mother had encouraged him to take art lessons, and he got into medical school because he illustrated, when he was at Duke, he illustrated a neurosurgery textbook or neuroanatomy textbook for one of the guys in the anatomy department. And so he was unbelievable. He used to give conferences. This is the days before PowerPoint, and we would all have our slides in carousels, and he would show up at the conference. He'd have one 35mm slide in his pocket, and that would just be the clinical case that he would show you. And then he always wanted the board that was a regular blackboard then would be clean, and we had to have a new box of colored chalk because he didn't like to draw with an old chip. He wanted a full piece. And this guy could draw the hand so fast. He'd draw it from one side and then he would turn it around and turn it up 45 degrees, looking down. I mean, the man knew the three-dimensional anatomy of the hand. I don't know anyone before or since that really understood it like he did. And then he had the gift to be able to illustrate it. So, but the guy that really got me drawing was Dr. Gregory. It was very important in my residency. We had to present the case that we'd done in front of Dr. Gregory once a week. And he always wanted you to illustrate, to draw the anatomy, draw what you'd done. And the old saying was, you knew you were finished with the residency when Dr. Gregory asked you a question, and the first thing you did was start looking for chalk. But so drawing's always been critical to me, and I try to get my residents to think about that and draw it, because anatomy in 3 dimensions is something that medical students don't learn. I mean, their whole life in medical school is a 2-dimensional life. They learn their anatomy from a page. And by and large, I mean, all of us hate cadavers. They stink. They don't look right. I mean, those of us that are surgeons have had the opportunity to see what anatomy in its perfect state looks like. But I insist that my residents learn to do that. And I've found it a powerful tool in teaching patients. I used to make a little sketch of the hand while I was talking to the patient, and I would write the chief complaint and the date of injury and my impression and the recommendations and the pros and cons and risks. And then my nurse, who was my wife, no one knew that except us and the people that worked there. But she would make a Xerox copy of that and give it to the patient, because patients always have the experience when they get home is, what did he say?
Absolutely.
And the typical patient is, damn if I know. I can't remember a thing. But now they got this. Well, this is it right here. He said this and this and this. So there are a lot of wonderful things. Patients want to help you get them well. And drawing things, all of us are visual learners to some degree. And I think if you can get the patient educated, I mean, they can understand the basics. They may not, they're not sophisticated thinkers, but they're much better and much more on your side. And I can't tell you how many times I've been talking to a patient. I saw a lot of scaphoid fractures. And
That was my next question.
If you know anything about that, because none of them really believe they have a fracture, first of all. Nobody knew about scaphoid fracture until Retkin. So to draw it out, it's amazing how once you draw the anatomy, you can feel it happening in the room. A lot of these guys had seen 2 or 3 other doctors before they saw me. And all of a sudden, the people have this attitude of, oh, God, this makes sense. This guy knows what he's talking about. And trust comes from that too, of course.
For sure. So your career, and I don't want to oversimplify, maybe, you focused on adults and you built a reputation. And as I understand it, you were a leader in the country with using the Herbert screw when it first was developed, helped popularize that technique, which has evolved since then further. And then the second part of your career maybe was Texas Scottish Rite and your partnership with Mary Beth. Is that a fair, overly simplified summary?
Yes, there was a blend in between because I'm not a golfer. I never could understand golf, and so my day off, I used to go to Scottish Rite and work 1 day a week for free, and it was fun, and I enjoyed it. And in fact, that's another interesting story. One of my children had 2 sons. The youngest boy went to Emory College. And Susie and I had a deal where we would always ride in the car with our sons to college. One of us would, then we'd fly back home, and the other person would use the other half of the ticket to go the other direction. And it was a great time because you had time to visit and talk where the conversation could be no conversation for long periods. Very powerful. At any rate, I was bitching about HMOs and stuff. And this is my son, who's a lawyer now. And he said, in fact, he went to Wash U. That's where he got his law degree. And he said, well, Dad, he said, isn't there anything about your job that you like anymore? And I said, well, I love taking care of those kids. And he said, well, why don't you just do that? I didn't have an answer.
That's amazing.
So Mary Beth was working at Scottish Rite about 2 or 3 days a week then, and I was going over there once a week. And she and I had always been very close. And I said, Mary Beth, I think the 2 of us ought to quit our regular jobs and do children's hand surgery full time. It was outrageous. No one's doing that. And so she thought it was great. And so we went to Tony Herring, who's the chief of the hospital then, and were able to convince him to take a chance on us. It was a wonderful thing. It's so amazing. The price of oil was high then, and the hospital was pretty flush, but they hired 2 full-time hand surgeons. It was nuts.
And how long did you do that? How many years were you?
I did that for 10 years. I'd saved my money when I was in private practice. I had a good financial advisor and a wife that shopped at Target. So I had saved enough money where I didn't have to work anymore. But I wanted to work. I wanted to work because I wanted to, not because I had to. And so I took a job there. I took a big cut in pay, but wasn't really important to me then. And then the first thing we did was we decided, well, we need to have a training program in children's hand surgery, because as you know, the volume at Scottish Rite is nuts. I mean, most people that I tell how many cases or something we have, they think we're lying. You know, I think it's another Texas ball tail. So I got some of my friends, belonged to a little travel club. Paul Mansky and Dick Gellerman were both in this club. But these guys that had fellowships, one of the glaring deficits of many hand fellowships, they have great adult hand, but virtually no children's hand. And so I got the guys at Mayo Clinic and David Green's program, San Antonio, ones in New York. And we got the residents to start rotating with us for a month. And we didn't know how long it needed to be. That was okay, because nobody else did either, you know. So, and then we said, well, maybe we ought to have something that somebody who wants to really do this stuff be able to have a more advanced one. How long? We have no idea. But we started with 3 months, kind of evolved into 6 months. Now people come and spend 6 months with us if they're interested in making children's hand a major part of their life. And now, 20 years later, there are lots of guys like us that do a lot of children's hand surgery, if not exclusively children's hand surgery. And it's been a neglected area. I mean, pediatric orthopedists, it's just next case when you want to talk about a hand case, most of them, which is good because it means we get to do it. But that's sort of the history of my career. And then when I was 65, I promised myself that I would quit operating because I had to make some friends stop operating who had.
Oh no. Shoot.
When I got to be 65, I quit operating.
I lost you for 1 second. Oh, it's me. Hold on 1 second. My internet's not great, apparently. Let me see if I can move and make it better. I want to transition it to you telling me the story of how you got interested in this, but just say that part about why you, why at age 65 you.
You're totally frozen.
Oh,
the whole deal.
Hold on 1 second.
Don't be nervous. Don't.
Oh, I'm going to relocate.
There you are.
I'm sorry about that. Shoot. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Picture's a little bit fuzzy. Am I sharp?
You're sharp, but something changed. I guess it's just in my house. Can you wave to me for a second? Yeah, it's not. I just plugged into a line. What the heck is going on? I tell you what, let's do this. I think we're okay. Although no, you're not moving normally. I think I think it'll be okay. Let's do this. Let's tell me again why you decided to stop operating at 65, and then I'll ask you how you got interested in this story.
Well, I had to make a surgeon once who had continued to operate past his prime and was hurting people. And I had to make that stop. And it was very unpleasant experience. And I promised myself that I would never let myself get to that point. I love surgery. I love teaching it. And now that I don't do it, I still do some teaching, but I have only the courage of the non-combatant. I lose credibility when I don't actually do it. So, but it was a great chapter in my life. Like a lot of things, you find new avenues for adventure. And that's when this history thing sort of started
Yeah.
with me. I, towards the end of my adult practice, I read a book by Doris Kearns Goodwin called No Ordinary Time. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and it was about the White House during World War II. And I was just blown away by that. And then I knew that Dr. Littler had told some stories about when he was in World War II. And I sort of started looking around at things and reading a little bit. And then I was lucky enough to be in the AOA. I was at an AOA meeting one time, and Andy Weiland, who was in the travel club with Dick and Paul and I, a bunch of other really great guys. Andy went to school with Doris Kearns, it was then. They went to college together. Can't remember which one it was, but at any rate, she was a speaker at the AOA meeting that year. And at the cocktail party, he introduced me to her. And I told her about what I'd done on this and how I was having trouble finding some things. And she said, well, you need to get in the FDR library. And I said, well, yeah, there's no chance of that. And she said, you want to bet? She made one phone call and I was in it. But so I went to Hyde Park, New York, and went through the library and spent some time in Bunnell's old office, got to know one of his last partners, wonderful guy named Dr. Brown. And Brownie just took me under his wing and told me a lot of great stories about Bunnell and took me to a lot of these places that I subsequently found out about. Got me hooked up with Bunnell's son, who was a psychiatrist in the East Bay. And it just kind of went on from that. So, and it took me years to do this. I would take trips and go to a place to kind of see where it had happened. And a lot of these hospitals that were involved in this during World War II no longer exist. They're not even there. In fact, there's only one of the 10 that's still a functioning hospital. So it just sort of grew and it took on a life of its own. And then when Mary Beth became president of the Hand Society, she knew I was interested in this. And she asked me to give this talk at the meeting. And then someone asked me to give the President and Fellows talk because they'd heard about it. And that's where I got involved with the Dick Smith lecture.
So I love that. That is a perfect segue. So why don't we do this? I think we're going to make this discussion into one episode. And just because it's already been 30 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is stop. I'll download what we've done so far. Right now, I'm going to send you a new invite and I'll join you. So you'll just have to check your email and then we'll join each other again on Zoom in 2 minutes or something like that. And we'll jump right into the talk.
Okay, sounds great. I'm going to